One of the verses in this chapter, this passage is taken from St. Matthew chapter 10, toward the end of it, from verse 34 onwards, and it's one of the verses in there struck me, and I'll read it real quick. And he says, "I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household." I like that one part where it says daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. I feel like that's like the plot of every single Malayalam serial you see on TV nowadays, right? I think that's even the plot of almost every Malayali household. I mean, not ours, because Pachima loves her mother-in-law. It's fine, but I'm sure there's it's not unheard of where there's that strife between mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. Shamash, don't worry, I'm sure it's gonna be okay. Only a week left. But this idea of bringing strife to the family, bringing strife to the home, it's not very uncommon for us. And it's actually very surprising because you're thinking when you read that these are the words of Christ, why is Christ bringing strife into my home? Why is Christ here turning my household against me? It says here, don't think I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. So even these words here are almost troubling, and just if you only look at just this little snapshot right here, you think this doesn't even belong in the gospel. Maybe Matthew didn't write it down that day properly. When he was writing his journal or something, he didn't write it down properly. I don't know why he misquoted Jesus. The truth is, he didn't actually misquote Jesus. But we know that. We know that he was there with Jesus from the very beginning, and he was following Jesus, so he recalls this teaching. It's one of the many teachings that Christ gives his disciples. It is true that there's almost a certain, even I use this term very loosely, a certain violence when it comes to the gospel message. And it's not a physical violence. Although nowadays, if you look around nowadays, you'll think that's what it is. You look at where we are right now in this current situation where we are, there are so many Christians who are being persecuted. They are under the sword. There are so many people who are in the Middle East who are being persecuted. There are even people in India being persecuted. Even here in this country, religion is being persecuted. And it's not like an outright war, it's very subtle. But that's the sword that Christ really is talking about. Our walk in the gospel, our journey with Christ, never did he ever say it's supposed to be easy. Never did he ever say it's going to be, a walk in the park. If we truly walk with Christ, think about the walk that he went through. From the beginning of his public ministry, though he was walking among the people, there were always a group of people who were always out to get him. From the moment he entered Jerusalem to begin that final phase of his public ministry, we know that there were already people plotting his death. And yet he continued walking on that journey. And he continued calling all of us to walk with him on that journey. When he was eating that Last Supper with his disciples, he knew at that moment that the person who was dipping that bread in the cup with him had already betrayed him. And yet he continued to ask us to walk on that journey with him. When they came to arrest him in the middle of the night, the same thing. He had already known what was going to happen. He goes to the garden to pray and asks his disciples to pray with him, to stay awake even longer, because he knew that this was the night that all these things were going to happen. And he tells them, walk with me, pray with me. Then when he gets arrested, he gets beaten, he gets tortured, all these things happen to him. He doesn't say, don't walk with me, go take a break or relax for a little bit. That invitation to walk with him is still there. So even when things are good, when he's healing, when he's providing bread and fish for thousands of people, when all these miracles are happening, he's saying, I'm inviting you to walk with me. The invitation was still there when Christ was suffering. That invitation was still there when Christ was suffering. So when he was suffering and going through all these tribulations on our behalf, he didn't say, go take a break. He said, walk with me, even in that suffering. Take up your cross and walk with me. Come follow me. He reiterates that here in this passage. When he's walking with his cross towards Golgotha, and you see Simon being forced to help him with his cross. We need to replace that image of Simon with each and every single one of us. It wasn't easy for him to take the cross with Jesus. He was probably getting hit too along the way. He was probably getting whipped along the way too. People were probably scorning him too. And yet he followed with Jesus bearing that cross. The world that we live in today is increasingly becoming more and more secularized. And those of us who have even just a little bit more faith are often demonized. We're often seen as the ones who are crazy. We're often the ones who are seen as the ones who are backwards. We're often the ones who people like to make fun of. But that doesn't mean that we give up our faith and then just let the world kind of take over. Just in the same way as Christ keeps inviting us to follow him when things are good, he's also asking us to follow him when things are difficult. Because that's the test of our faith. The test of our faith isn't when things are going great. It isn't when things are easy for us. It isn't when people are it's when people are persecuting us. It is when our faith becomes challenged by those who are around us and say, why are you believing this? Why are you going to church on a Sunday morning? Why don't you stay home? Why don't you know what's even better than standing 4 hours in a liturgy? Why don't you go run like a marathon or something? Or why don't you go take your kids to some soccer game or something? Forget church. There's better things to do. Go plant a tree or something. Do whatever. Do something else. Christ is saying even that this walk of faith that we have is a walk with the sword. Not that we're supposed to have violence against other people, but it's never supposed to be easy. When it comes here, even among the household, it says here something even that's very troubling for some of us. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. That doesn't mean we forsake our families. He's not telling you to forget your parents. That's not what he's saying. He's not telling you to forget your children. That's not what he's saying. But what he's saying is, what is the ultimate gift we can give to our children? What is the ultimate gift we can give to our parents? Is making sure that they are also with Christ. They're maintaining their communion with Christ, their prayer life with Christ. They're maintaining their church discipline. All these things where they're increasing in their spirituality with Christ. The greatest gift we can give to these children is Christ. The greatest gift we can give to our families is Christ. So what he's saying here is not that we forsake Christ for our families. Oh, my kid or my son or daughter has an exam coming up. So instead of going to church on Sunday, I'm just going to tell him to stay home and study. No. Those few hours that he may or may not have been studying while he's missing church, I guarantee you he's probably sleeping at home. Those 3 hours or 2 hours he could have spent at church, you could have found somewhere else throughout the whole weekend to make up for those 2 hours while they were at church. One of the Bible passages we're all very familiar with is there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time for this, there's a time for that. It's a very familiar passage for all of us. There is a time to study, and there's also a time to worship. The time to worship is not the time to study. The time to worship is not the time to sleep in. We have to fight, oftentimes, our own urges, our own selfish desires, our own laziness even. Or even these thoughts that make it so rational. We can rationalize all these things. It's an exam. An exam is a big deal. Especially nowadays the finals are coming up. Why am I going to go to church? Why am I going to go to evening prayer? Why am I going to pray when I should be studying, when I should be preparing? The time to study for your final exam is the day before your final exams. The time to study for your final exams is from day one of class. Ask any of your teachers. The time to start studying for your final exam isn't the day before your final. It's from day one of the class. That's when you start studying for your final. From day one of your class, you start preparing for the final. Right? Then your mind is already set for the final. And you're preparing. rather than replacing church with that quote-unquote study time. Or any, I'm just using studying right now, there's any number of examples we put there. Because some of us are actually afraid of that struggle. Because the struggle isn't always going to be with external forces. We're not struggling against other people who are persecuted. None of us here is persecuted. We're persecuting ourselves. This violence that we're talking about here, the sword that we're talking about here, isn't a physical violence against other people. It is a struggle within ourselves. It's a struggle. There's a violence within our own self. We're fighting with our own demons. We're fighting with our own selfish desires. We're fighting with our own rationalization. There are lots of other things we could be doing on a Sunday morning, but we've gathered here in this place for a specific reason. And for each and every single one of us, and not just for Sunday mornings, in the evenings too, when we have evening prayer, or when you have your own family prayer. There's reasons why we spend those times, those moments, doing those things, whether it's prayer as a family, worshiping in the church, all these different things. When we're fighting all these other urges. Because Christ never said that our walk with Him is going to be easy. When He calls us in the good times, He's also calling us in the bad times. But He never once said, I'm ever going to leave you alone. He never once said, though the struggle is real, though the hardship is there, though you might not get along with your family, the greatest gift we can give to them is Christ. And so He's calling us and saying, you walk with me, you will never be alone. So it's not that we forsake our children, but rather it's like we bring them to the church. We bring them to Christ. And sometimes, in the Epistle of St. James, he says, if you take one step towards God, God will take 10 more towards you. And so sometimes you don't have to, if you're struggling with your faith or your children are struggling with theirs, that's fine. Take one step towards Christ. Along with your children, take one step towards Christ, and He will come closer to you. That's what He's asking us to do. Realizing that it's not easy. So that's the struggle. So for us here, that's our struggle. Though we don't have to worry about someone physically hurting us, so we don't have to worry about us being persecuted by other religions or other people, our persecution is real. It's a persecution of secularism. It's a persecution of laziness. It's a persecution of even technology. I'd rather be on my phone than listen to Teji up here on this time, doing the sermon. I'd rather look on, I'm going to end with one little story. The other day we were at a church function and I was watching somebody and they were like, I think it was a 3-minute introduction that said, we're done with prayer, let's just spend a couple of minutes in silence. And there was someone, I was just kind of watching them because they were sitting next to me and they caught my eye because as soon as he said, or actually I can't remember what the argument, as soon as they said, we're going to spend a few minutes in silent meditation or just a few minutes in silence, we just pray, let's have some moments of silence. This person pulls out their phone. And that caught my attention. And so now here's the problem. Now I'm trying to meditate, I'm trying to do my thing, I'm trying to be this moment, but my eyes watching their phone. And so I said, okay, so now I'm like, all right, well, I can't do this, so I'm going to watch this person. Not even 4 seconds have gone by since Achan said, let's meditate. The phone comes out. And the person may realize, like, oh, I'm on the phone. Okay, I'm going to put the phone away real quick. 10 seconds goes by, they pull the phone back out. What they were doing the first time, they were checking their Facebook feeds and the Twitter feeds, they're doing all that. Put the phone away. 10 seconds later, I guess they just couldn't sit. 10 seconds goes by, and they're like, I'm too antsy on my phone. Pull the phone out. What do they do again? What do they do after those 10 seconds? What do they do? They went back and checked the exact same feeds. I went back and looked at my Facebook again, my Twitter again. In those 10 seconds, I put my phone in my pocket. Did I get any new messages? Is there any more new posts? Is there any new photos that went online? In 10 seconds? No. Put the phone back away. Maybe another 10 seconds goes by. They're getting antsy. They're like, oh man, I don't have my phone with me for 10 seconds. What do I do? What do I do again the third time? What do you think they did this third time? They went back to the same Facebook page, the same Twitter feed, to see if there's any more pictures there. In a matter of 20 seconds, they looked at their phone 3 times, looked at the exact same thing. There's no updates. I don't know what they were expecting. I'm sorry, whoever that person is. You're not that important where you're going to get a Facebook update every 10 seconds. Because in that moment, there was a moment of prayer. And we're supposed to be fighting ourselves. In that moment, that person lost that battle. Because the person was supposed to be fighting their own urges to look at their phone, and they lost that battle. That's the sword. That's the battle. That's the violence we're talking about. That's the violence that we all have to, that's the battle we all have to take when it comes to our faith. So I pray that all of us can at least overcome those battles. Right, let's put away those phones, take away those distractions, forget studying, not forever, just for those couple hours in your church. Because that's the walk that Christ is inviting us to join in. Not an easy one, no. But as long as we walk with Him, we're never alone. So whatever struggle comes our way, He's there to help us. Who was helping who carrying the cross that day? Was Simon helping Christ, or was Christ helping Simon? All praise and thanksgiving be to the blessed Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, now and always and forever and ever. Amen.